we are continuing with our conference. I've slightly changed position, so now I'm one in charge right now. I'm presenting you Dr. Dragica Čeč. She's a senior research fellow at the Science and Research Center in Koper, also an assistant professor here at the Faculty of Arts. Her research focuses on the cultural and social perception of the life cycle among different social groups. She's specialized in early modern period, also in the 19th century. So we are stepping back in time with her presentation entitled Experiences of Motherhood Among Unmarried Mothers 1780-1840, so pregnancy, childbirth, and the care of illegitimate children. So, Dragica, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this kind of presentation. So we are happy about a lot of work to do, so I will start. This theme about the pregnancies, the marginal groups is the theme which is with my research from the PhD onwards. So I will present materials which is, let's say, collected through 20 years of research. And try to make some emphasis on different aspects of the illegitimacy children, mothers with this type of children and so on. For the beginning, I will talk about the agency of these mothers, which is derived in the last 10 years from the idea which is, let's say, grow up in the field of the research of the poverty and pauper. That's why you commonly say about pauper agency. We are underlining the approach which is from the bottom to up. And we face this in last 20 years, at least last 20 years, this variety of the experience, so the experiences, so the life of these persons are very different in some way. The term agency is connected with two characteristics. The first is that the persons, the individuals have opportunities which can be chosen. Also in the field of the illegitimate birth, so the woman which have the illegitimate children could choose between different opportunities. And another thing which is connected with agency is the space where they are living. And this space is also an opportunity to make different choices. Sometimes it is possible that they improve their lives. This is this, let's say, approach which is gone from the earliest studies which were most seen from the up-down approach, so how the authorities perceive this kind of the woman, how the system perceives this kind of woman, and how the society perceives this kind of woman. The notion of space is also important because that some of the researchers emphasize that, especially in the urban areas, these mothers have the possibility to use the urban institution in their favor, and they also have the legal resources to use them in their favor. In my research, I noticed also that some rural spaces also give the woman some legal resources. It depends on the, let's say, the local authorities and the local sovereigns, which take care which own the courts which offer them these legal resources. So the experience of this woman were described as determined by the law, legal regulations and procedures of the church and the local authorities in the, let's say, all the research, and now we're moving this agency to their agency. And at the end, we can underline and we can summarize this agency as that it was, let's say, put into the space in which other factors such as gender, social rank, and religions shape their attitudes and shape also attitudes toward these norms. And in general, if you read something in the predominant European context, it is underlined that in Catholic and rural communities, the agency of this illegitimate mother was the worst. But Slovenian case is the case of the, let's say, quite strict Catholic area, but the opportunities of the woman were quite wider, so I will show some cases of the different approaches to this condition of the life. Okay, the sources which I used in the last years, also for the other topics which I researched, but these themes are interconnected. When you are looking at the protocols of the pre-existing system, you are looking at the stories about the children, about the mothers, about the old people, about the widows and widowers, and so on. The another source are petitions, which are perceived as the ego documents with several constraints. I also work with the court and police records, and also with, let's say, typical ego documents. I choose one ego documents also for this paper. It is the memories from Ernestina Jelovšek. It is not one woman, it is the daughter of the prominent Slovenian poet who wrote also the Slovenian anthem. And he was the father of 3 illegitimate children with one woman. So different kinds of stories which are connected with her mother, with the memories of her father, also connected with the memories of her mother, will be used in this paper. The second picture is connected with the protocols of police system, where different circumstances of the everyday life of these persons are recorded in the, let's say, formalized form. In the early 19th century, you see it is printed and just filling. So it's kind of standardized form. Okay, the second thing which has to be in place is when we are speaking about the legitimacy are the forms of legitimacy. The European research refers to main forms of legitimacy, but I choose to add 2 more. This, let's say, broader known are the legitimacy of the persons who are supposed to be married in the future. So, in the end, these parents were married. But the second one is generally the pregnancy or birth of children whose parents never married to each other. But the third, also connected to our story, is the question about the life cycle of the woman who gave the birth to the illegitimate children. As it is today, the very young women were experiences motherhood different than older ones or widows. And for this historical period, it's also very important and very symptomatic. Also, for if you research the current history, there is the question about the pre-relations. In the 19th century, it was very important pre-relations due to job, because very important social group of the clerks, the state officials, a lot of their working career faces the migrations, which were not always connected with the stable payment and the possibility to look after the family. And the second very important thing in this first part of the 19th century in this research area was ideology. So this idea about romantic love and the idea about the freedom connected with the Enlightenment is quite seen in this area. Okay, attitudes towards such mothers. In this research period, still more issues attached to unmet parenthood and illegitimate children were quite important. Bastard was characterized as deviant behavior leading to the stigmatization by societies. And here I have to make one notion. When I checked some biographical data about this family, which will be presented in my paper, one with others, when I look this, let's say, general descriptions made on Wikipedia, on the geographic lexicon, there is still this notion, this very negative notion connected with this relationship with the mother with illegitimate children. As it's not written from their modern point of view. So quite interesting, and it's quite different than it was presented by this daughter of this poet, Ernestina. Why so this societal attitudes toward illegitimate mothers so important? Because this is also something which is very spread to the research. The notion that this state touches the core of the family values. It involves sexual reproduction, it involves kinship, it involves marriage, it involves inheritance and the property. That's why it's so important that these attitudes are so negative. But if you read my abstract, there is another very important thing which occurs in the second quarter of the 18th century. There is a major shift in the policy of the Catholic monarchy. The end of the 18th century, it introduced the new values of the rationalist state, in which the child is perceived as something with economic value, but they have to be properly raised and educated. In this sense, there is coming to the changing of the legal norms, there is coming to the changes in the social systems and so on. So the two major shifts which occurs in the second part of the 18th century are introduction of the new foster care for the illegitimate children. This is not the orphanages, this is the foster care, the system in which the children are given to the foster parents, especially in the rural areas. And another another aspect that there are introduced several mechanisms to supervise the pregnancy of the illegitimate mothers and to give them the space where they can give birth in some sort of discreet way. Regarding not be let's say constrained with their let's say socio-economic circumstances. So if you don't have the money, you also have the possibility to come to the place where this birth could be made safe. And another thing which is introduced in this period, also the notion that the pregnant woman with illegitimate children have to be prevented from the punishment. This punishment could occur after the birth of this child in order to save the unborn child. Oh, only 5 minutes, so I have to go a little bit quicker, very quicker. So, why these things are introduced? Because they are believed that the illegitimate pregnant woman, the majority who are working with these questions, the majority of the persons who commit infanticide were servants of the young woman with no economic security and with no, let's say, social network. They also do a little bit of research, also statistical research, also in the end of the 18th century. Now I'm showing you the data which are connected with the Slovenian area for the first part of the 19th century, and there is still shown that the majority of the infanticide was made with use of the violence and not with taking care after the birth. The orange part is the children who died because the mother didn't take care of them immediately after the birth because they don't have any help. This woman, in majority of these women, gave birth in the secret place with no help. Okay. The system which was introduced, the foster care, there were two big institutions which surrounded this research area. One was the family hospital and family home and mother's hospital in Trieste. There was a possibility to also give them anonymously the newborn child, so-called Rota. The second was in Ljubljana, but there was not this possibility to give the child, let's say, with no notice. It was not possible. Okay, just for the notion. In some parts of Europe, there was very much pressure done to the mothers to name the name of the father. This was not the case in the Catholic monarchy. Here is the birth record from the parish where the newborns from the Trieste hospital were recorded, and here we see the names of the father there. So they are all unknown. The mothers are some new ones because of this Rota, and godfathers were and godmothers were the similar always. Okay. So in the 18th century give some let's say guidelines, and not just guidelines, the modes of behavior for this illegitimate pregnant woman. So the first step was to make pregnancy public. The second, give the birth in the maternity hospital. give the newborn child into foster care, and at the end they have to be a wet nurse in order not to pay the costs. This was, in general, I don't have the time, but I have the several cases shown, so this will be my article at the end. Regardless of all this, the societal picture about the maternity hospital were very negative. This was stated in these memories of Kristina Jelošek as well. Here I did one case from the beginning of the 19th century. 3 young girls who ran away from the maternity hospital in Trieste. They were all from different parts of Slovenia, so they were not born and they were not known in Trieste, but they didn't want to be wet nurses in that hospital. They ran away and they put the trace because the hospital want to get that money from their relatives. So the taxes were quite big. The biggest taxes was for the children which were given to the foster care. The next notion which I want to give is this distance between the foster institution and the parents who take these children into foster care. So the Trieste is here, you see here, and the majority, this data are from the mid of the 80s, in the 18th century until the mid of the 19th century, and the majority of the children were in this area. So here is about 220 kilometers from the institution, and the only means of transportation till last few years in the mid of the 19th century was walking. Okay, I will skip all this, just to go to the end. Okay, to make a little bit of this variety, I just have to think about the case of the Prince Sharon and his lover, his let's say partner in modern terms. She gave the birth of 3 his children. To the adulthood survived just 1. The first girl died in the first year of life. She was given to the private foster care. Second is the Ernestina who survived, and the third was the boy who died after 2 years after the birth. The father who took the responsibility for these children died before his son was 2 years old. They got little support from his property. They were, because of the social network of the father, they get some support for the boarding system, which is quite unusual for these children of elite mothers. And because he was so prominent at the end, they got some support for the Slovenian associations. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dragica. I think now it's Dunja's turn. So, the next to speak is my colleague, Dunja Dobaja. She is a research fellow at the Institute of Contemporary History in Ljubljana. Her research focuses on the social and medical history of the interwar period and the Second World War in Slovenia. She's especially focusing on maternal and child welfare. In the last year, she is particularly interested in children with special needs, and she has published now already 2 monographs. So here is the data must be corrected because she recently published another one. So today she's going to speak about unwed mothers in the occupational legal system in Slovenia during the Second World War. So Dunja, please.
Thank you. So as we heard before, in April 1941, the area of Slovenia was divided between 4 occupiers: Italian, German, Hungarian, and a few villages came under the independent state of Croatia. In this paper, I will talk about the area occupied by the Italian and German army. German occupied Gorenska, Štajerska, and a few settlements in the northwest of the county of Prekmurje, while Italy occupied the county of Notranjska, Ljubljana, and most of the county of Dolenjska, which constituted the so-called province of Ljubljana. Based on the occupational legislation and archival sources, the paper presents the situation of illegitimate mothers in the context of the fascist and Nazi social system in occupied Slovenia. Let us first look at the area of the Ljubljana province. The Italian occupier was in a great hurry to annex the Ljubljana province to the Kingdom of Italy. The annexation decree of King Victor Emmanuel III from the 3rd May 1941 promised autonomy to the province of Ljubljana. However, this order was drafted with a propaganda purpose, i.e. to emphasize the more tolerant attitude of the Italian occupier towards the Slovene people than that of the German one. Of course, this tolerance was only illusory. The Italian occupier's aim was to integrate the country as much as possible into the Italian fascist system, which the Italian occupation authorities envisaged would take a long time. Due to the unfavorable staffing situation in Italy, the civil commissioner for the province of Ljubljana, Emilio Grazioli, retained officers from the former Banat administration. He maintained the same organizational structure of the High Commissioner's Department as that of the Banat administration. There were 8 departments. The 6th was the Social Policy and Health Department. The High Commissioner appointed an Italian expert to each department. Under such a system, legislation was also passed focusing on the social rights of mothers, including illegitimate mothers. Mothers enjoyed the same social and health rights as before the war, and the Italian occupier extended the system through fascist organizations. These organizations carried out fascisation under the disguise of social welfare. These organizations are also provided assistance to illegitimate mothers. Mothers of Jewish origin did not receive assistance. On the 10th of November 1942, an order of the High Commissioner on the establishment of the Provincial Association for the Protection of Mothers and Children in Ljubljana was published in the official paper for the Ljubljana province. It was directly subordinate to the High Commissioner It carried out its tasks according to guidelines of the National Institution for the Protection of Mothers and Children, the Opera Nazionale per la Protezione della Maternità ed Infanzia. Its obligations included inter alia, setting up kitchens for impoverished mothers, setting up consultation centers for mothers, the establishment of milk, flour and other food distribution centers for impoverished children whose mothers have been unable to breastfeed, the establishment of kindergartens for children whose mothers were employed. Regarding assistance to illegitimate mothers, the Provincial Association has assisted illegitimate mothers by placing illegitimate children whose the mothers were unable or unwilling to support in orphanages or in so-called reception centers. The legislation and archival sources do not really tell us what kind of reception centers are we talking about here. They may have been temporary reception centers for the onward placement of illegitimate children with foster parents or with adoptive families. How was it done? Where were they placed? Who adopted them? I have not researched these questions, so unfortunately I cannot give you answers to them. However, if we take the legislation into account, the Provincial Association apparently tried to integrate as much as illegitimate children as possible outside the institutions by giving a reward to possible foster parents, apparently in the form of payment for the recognition and legalization of illegitimate children. To what extent this was actually the case, I have not found in the sources. Already at the end of the August 1941, another fascist organization was founded in Ljubljana, the Women's Fasci, the women's section of the Italian Fascist Party, within which two sections were set up. The first was dedicated to peasant housewives, the second one, women working in factories or being at home and in households. Women of Jewish origin could not apply for admission. The Women's Fasci provide moral and material support to wives and mothers in need. But under the disguise of its commitment to social issues, it carried out a process of spreading fascism. The fascist regime initially wanted to show itself as the protector of the Slovenian nation, especially as the protector of mothers and children. High Commissioner Gazzori emphasized the fascist regime's concern for the family, especially for families with larger number of children. Such families were also rewarded as well as illegitimate mothers. In my research on illegitimate births in Ljubljana during the Second World War, I found out that there were mothers in Ljubljana who had several illegitimate children, max 4. Why it is so, actually I don't know, because the fascist regime, as I have said before, emphasized the importance of family, and families with more children were particularly valued. Mothers with more children and mothers who gave birth to twins were rewarded. The daily newspaper announced to whom the High Commissioner had awarded the prize for the birth of twins. I didn't find this notice for illegitimate mothers, but I found it in archival sources. For example, a woman from Ljubljana who was a cleaning lady gave birth to twins in the summer 1942. Since she had 3 illegitimate children to support on her weak earnings, had no property, with no bad reputation, she was was awarded a prize. She had no bad reputation means in the moral sense, and above all in the sense of loyalty, that she had no issues with occupying authorities. That is to say, the mothers had been always checked beforehand. Fathers who supported their families by working for different employers were legally entitled to family support for dependent children. This assistance was also granted to illegitimate mothers. Unmarried mothers who were not employed as civil servants but as various workers received family allowance for each dependent child under the age of 14. This age limit could be extended to 16 if the child had special needs. If the illegitimate mother was employed as a civil servant, the age limit was 18. The legislation set a basic amount of family support. However, the amount of family support was adjusted according to economic trends. On the 10th of September 1943, after the capitulation of Italy, the leader of the German Reich, Adolf Hitler, established the so-called Operations Zone Adriatisches Küstenland for a large area of northern Italy and Slovenia, with its center in Trieste. It comprised 6 provinces, including the province of Ljubljana. Hitler appointed Friedrich Reiner, the NSDAP's Carinthian, that means Koroška, provincial leader, state deputy, and chief of the civil administration for the occupied areas of Koroška and Gorenska as its chief commissioner. The period of the German occupation of province of Ljubljana is weak in terms of historical sources. There are no new laws in the official paper that was also deal with the situation of illegitimate mothers. I concluded that there was a similar organization of legal, social and health protection for mothers in the province of Ljubljana as during the Italian occupation. The situation was completely different in other parts of Slovenia which were under German occupation. Nazi legislation paid considerable attention to illegitimate births as their number increased due to the war situation. The Nazi authorities also exercised strict control in this area, in particular with intention to establish the origin of parents and rights raising therefrom. In this paper, I focus on Slovenian illegitimate mothers who complied with the Nazi racial laws and were given certain social rights under Nazi law. If a father of an illegitimate child was killed or went missing as a member of the German army, that child was entitled to a child benefit. If the father had already acknowledged the child before mobilization in the German army and was paying court-ordered child maintenance. The problem was if a father of an illegitimate child had been killed in action before he had acknowledged the child. The Reich Minister of Finance therefore issued an order of the 27th of May 1943, which brought amendments to the rules on establishing paternity in the event of death or disappearance of a member of the German army before he had acknowledged paternity and the resulting legal obligations. In that case, paternity could be established on the basis of letters or other records of the fallen or missing member of the German army, which proved beyond doubt that he was the father of the legitimate child in question. Paternity could also be proved on the basis of statements made by other members of the unit in which the fallen or missing person had served. If paternity could not be established in the first or second case, the competent social services tried to establish paternity. Once paternity had been established by one of these methods, the illegitimate mother was entitled to child allowance only for a period from the birth of the child until the death of the father. If the illegitimate mother needed child benefit for a longer period of time, she had to justify it. German law also provided the illegitimate children of missing members of the German army with the entitlement to so-called family maintenance. It is not entirely clear from the archival sources what kind of social transfer was it. However, the conditions for receptions are listed. If an illegitimate child was born when its potential father was already missing in action, it was entitled to family maintenance. If there was evidence that he was the biological father of the child and therefore liable to pay maintenance, it was necessary to prove paternity. Probably again in the way already mentioned, letter statements. However, the illegitimate mother was also entitled to family maintenance if she could prove that the missing person had a serious intention to marry her. A serious intention was taken to mean that a public engagement had existed before the disappearance or could be proved from the letters or other records of the disappeared person, from statements made by him in the unit he was serving, from statements made by relatives, and so on. A family maintenance assistance could not be granted if at the time of the disappearance there was a spouse or of the disappeared person who was entitled to family maintenance, or if there were several illegitimate mothers whose father was the disappeared person, or if the illegitimate mother was of Jewish descent. Due to the war situation, there were difficulties with payments of maintenance for illegitimate children of fathers recruited into the German army or called up for labor service. According to the instructions of the Reichsstatthalter for Carinthia, that's in Koroška, the youth offices were not allowed to make deduction from the debtor's income in case of such difficulties with maintenance payments. In the debt recovery of maintenance for illegitimate children, the war situation was taken into account, as well as the fact that the father had been recruited into the German army or was called up for labor service. Of course, not all fathers of illegitimate children were mobilized into the German army or called up for labor service. They may have been employed in various offices, factories, in agriculture, or they just may have been mobilized by partisans and have fallen in battle, or they may have joined the resistance against the occupier by themselves and become victims of the occupier's violence. In short, their fates were different because of the war situation. The fact is that there were proceedings before courts for the recognition of paternity and payments of maintenance. Not all illegitimate fathers responded to summons of the court for various reasons. Such fathers of illegitimate children had to be tracked by social services in order to acknowledge paternity and thus pay maintenance. Sometimes the search was successful, sometimes not. In the archival materials, I have found only cases where a father of an illegitimate child was employed or forcibly mobilized by partisans and was killed in action or got shot by partisans. I don't know how the occupation authorities were dealing with the case of illegitimate fathers who joined the partisan movements. At this stage of my research, I have not found any sources that would explain it. Thank you.
And the last one to speak today is Tanja Buda. Tanja is a doctoral Is a doctoral researcher at the Faculty of Social Work of the University of Ljubljana. Her research focuses on the social history of single motherhood in socialist Slovenia, with particular attention to welfare institutions, gender norms, and the role of social work. She will present today a topic on domestic violence, entitled When Violence Leads to Separation, Social Work and Silencing of Perpetrators in Slovenia, 1955-1980. So thank you. Please.
Thank you. So first of all, I need to explain a little bit because I changed the title. Because when I was writing the abstract, I was still working on my PhD, with this work in progress. So I decided to change a little bit. Let me start. My presentation is just a small part of my PhD thesis, which focuses on history of social work in Yugoslavia, so after the Second War, with an emphasis on single mothers. And for the purpose of this presentation, I will introduce a little bit of archive material, but my main questions are, so how did social work institutions respond to domestic violence? Because as you will see, it's a special approach or not approach to the cases of domestic violence. And as I was looking through my cases, I realized that there were things that were unspoken or missing from the archives, and it was how social workers were dealing with perpetrators. And so in the end, I will also introduce you to the concept that I kind of coined during my analysis, because as I was working through my archives, I kept searching for the right term or the right concept to explain this, or to help me answer the questions that we were kind of asking this morning, like what about the men? Were men responsible? So what happened with men in these cases? A little bit of background. So first of all, my research kind of starts in 1955, because this was the time when the first School of Social Work was opened here in Ljubljana, and I conclude with the end of the state's socialism. Socialist period was full of social innovation, and this idea of building social welfare system was quite persistent to the whole socialist era. And one of the most important things that it did for single mothers was they closed this divide. It was very known in Western society when there were always widows with children and so-called fallen women. And the socialist state said, no more, all women are equal, and we're not going to divide them anymore. So this is, we already heard that the illegitimate children have the same rights as children born in the wedlock. And in the 75, they also said that they didn't specify which partnership was. So the marriage was not obligated anymore. So if you're living out of the wedlock, it was still seen as a real partnership. So anyway, for today's presentation, one of the key aspects is that after the Second War, the socialist state, so they equalized rights for men and women. They said that men and women are equal, and that meant in the social situation that men and women are also equal within the family structure. So they would say if a woman is not happy within the marriage, she can leave, and the same goes for men. So they see as men and women as an equal adults that were building the families. And also important point is that with the social welfare development, it also, so that the socialist state also developed centers for social work, or so-called state social work. It was the only kind of social work that was known during the socialism, and these were the state centers that were dealing or approaching people. So let's say like the main work would be the work with children, and then the second one was with families, especially so-called difficult families or dysfunctional families, and people with disabilities. And so during my research, one of the main points was I quickly realized that all this equality and welfare states never really addressed the patriarchal relationships. So the patriarchal norms persisted the whole socialism, although the socialist ideology was saying that they kind of overpassed this. So for today presentation, I will not be very specific about the cases. I will give you some of the examples. But basically, I looked through over 200 cases of social work in the centers for social work. These were archives from 50-50 to the 80s. And then I gathered 30 plus cases that tell the story. Those cases included a little bit more reports. It was essential that I understand what was the narrative, what was the story from the beginning to the end. But more than 200 cases were still kind of with me. I still remember some of the stories, but they were not included in the final analysis. Those files, the cases of social work, included different reports, such as social work reported to the court, to the police, or they reported to school, employer. There were quite a lot of patronage nurses reports, since they were working in the field, and some administrative papers, such as court cases. Also, the police reached to social workers. So there's a pile of a lot of different reports and notes. So within these cases, another point is that these cases were all include single mothers, because all of these cases, in the end, parents got divorced or widowed, so they were, in the end, they were separated. This was one of my criteria. And in the cases of domestic violence, it was very interesting how the violence itself it was rarely explicitly named. It was, so also when patronage nurses came to social workers, they were coming from different reasons. So for example, the child doesn't have enough room, or the child is not fed properly. But then in the end, in the background, there were cases of domestic violence. And it was very interesting how violence was just pushed aside and different kind of problems were brought up to light. So they were, the violence, domestic violence was namely framed as family conflict, so they were beating each other, or very, very popular, alcoholism. It was a huge topic. Also, social workers were dealing with alcoholism, but basically they're saying that man was violent because of alcoholism, or it was an excuse. So he is drinking because he had a difficult life and because of the war consequences. And they also call this unstable home or dysfunctional family. And So as I mentioned, the patronage nurses were usually the first ones who detected the domestic violence. They told social workers, then social workers went on the field to check. But I also realized that in the archives there was no formal or not even informal ways of or maybe instructions how to deal with domestic violence. So there was no idea. The social workers didn't have any protocol on how to intervene or approach domestic violence. And even in the cases that I looked through, I couldn't see any pattern that would say, okay, so they knew something about domestic violence and they did this and that. There was no sign of that. Important, one of the focuses of my analysis was how institutions approach to men and women, or better say mothers and fathers. They believe that if two adults, men and women, are married and they don't have children, but they are beating each other, or there is a violence within this couple, they didn't intervene. So the idea was that social workers only intervene if there were children. All of the cases have children. So the emphasis of social work approach was always on mothers. So what to do with the mother? Mother was first to be called and questioned, and they asked her about about financial stability, and if they saw that father was taking the child alimony for himself or drinking, they would give those child alimonies to the mother. So they were really taking care of financial stability. They were pressuring mother to be employed if she was not employed. So it was a lot of emphasis on financial aspects of the problem. And also they were judging the mother by the parenting ability. So saying, you are a good mother, you're not a good mother, you are a good cook. It was very important. If she was not cooking for the children, she was not a good, not a good mother. Or if she was not a good housekeeper. So it was really what was under the microscope when it comes to dealing with mothers. And also it was very important if mother was compliant with the institution. So if she was going to Center of Social Work, if she was saying, yes, we have a problem, or please help, it is really important for social workers to know that. And as such, mothers became the prime subject of intervention. So it was focus, again, was based on how mothers were doing. Now, as I went through all of the cases, I also asked myself, so there's a lot of talk about single mothers and unwed mothers and unmarried mothers. And I realized that single mothers were always defined by the absence of the father. I mean, single to who, right? And as they are defined by the absence or presence of the father. So if father was present, it was so-called the perfect family or the full family. If father was present, they were unperfect family. And then I looked what was going on with the perpetrators. And this was sort of what I got from the cases. You can see there is a graphic presentation. More often than not, male perpetrators were not named. They were absent from the records. They were named very briefly, or they were not the focus or even a part of the intervention of social workers. And as we know, that most of the time, the social workers were dealing with domestic violence cases where the father was the perpetrator. And this was the main problem of this family. So usually the usual cases is that father is drinking and he's beating children and mother, and they are going to, the mother and children are going to the neighbors, and they're hiding around around the village and so on, and he's staying at home drinking and drinking. So I realized that there was no sanctions on this behavior. There were no procedures. They were saying they were giving invites to men, but if they didn't come to the Center of Social Work, there was no punishment. There was no consequences, and so it was not even the cases when they failed to provide for children. So if mother was bad mother because she didn't cook or did not do the housekeeping, the father was a bad father if he didn't provide for the family. And you can see that there's a graph representation that so this was violence in most of the cases. Alcoholism was very present, and also economic abuse. It means that father would take money that was spent for children and spend it in different ways. Sexual abuse, a lot of cases of incest that was never mentioned in the public discourse, but social workers repeatedly deal with the cases of incest. Or the father was absent or unknown. Right, so in my last 5 minutes, I would like to now focus and present to you the concept that kind of coined during my writings. And I realized that what was in these cases, it was something that I called immunitary masculinity. What I mean by immunitary masculinity is this idea of the father who is never responsible in this system. So he never gets we question why he disappeared. If the father is within the family, that is very nice. But if he just disappears, I mean, there is no sanctions for that. So he can just leave at any time that he wants. And this perpetuate behavior of men that didn't show up, the women got pregnant, but the men could just leave. Didn't have to pay alimony. There were cases where the alimony was just too little, or there was a cases, I remember that father was paid less alimony because he was a drunk, so he had to pay 1 liter of wine. And the court cases says, fine, you can pay less. And even the case of domestic violence, there was never responsibility for what the father was doing to this family. And so as we still know now, the border for this violence is if the father killed the mother, this is where we say, okay, this is murder, we have different standards. But until he beats children, beats women, there are no sanctions, no consequences. Now, immunitary masculinity is, I was very careful to put it in these terms because it is different than if there is no sanctions or impunity. Because it's not about that men are not, they don't get sanctioned within the court, within the court system, but it's about that men they have immunity when they are born within the patriarchal system. Meaning, if we can imagine the diplomat, when they become diplomat, they get immunity, diplomatic immunity. And I said the men, they have the same kind of, they have the same idea that they don't have to be responsible for the children. I don't understand immunitary as a privilege of men. I don't, it's not the case of gender dominance. I see immunity as something that enables men to be part of the family system. Because also socialism saw the division of gender as natural. So men need to work, and women need to cook and still be workers and take care of children. So this natural division is actually what what is the core of unitary masculinity, and that men are not able to participate in the community and family life. So to conclude, I understand the unitary masculinity as also the part of the dehumanization of men, because they are not allowed to feel. There were so many cases where men were really struggling with work. They were traumatized by the war. They saw horrible things, but they were not allowed to speak. So the only thing they were good for was working. And if they were not workers, they were losers, we would say. So in this is what I understand as unitary masculinity, that men have these roles in the patriarchy that enables them to be fathers, to be present in the community, and to be support for women. So I'm sort of my inspiration for the future is that unitary masculinity is also a tool to question social policies, because I can tell you that nowadays the situation, the center of social work is no different. So fathers, after brutal domestic violence cases, are just invited to come to the center of social work, never really responsible for what they've done. So this is the end.
So I guess we will take like 5 minutes for questions. So please, Dunja and Dragica, if you want to join us. Are there any questions already? Maybe for Tanja, because she's already here. Yeah, please.
I would like to know if there was any kind of legal system for domestic violence or marital rape or something, and if because you mentioned a very broad time span, and I wondered whether those policies shifted because also of second wave feminism that maybe spilled to Yugoslavia.
So no, so the domestic violence was never we're talking about socialist state, was never part of the legislation. I found that it was sort of bad treatment, which I understand was a violence. It was in the cases of if you want to get the divorce. This was one of the reasons, or can be. Now, when I was looking in the 60s, I was looking up, especially in the 60s, because until the 75, you needed to have a reason to get a divorce. It was so they were trying to see whose fault it is that they got divorced, and that those court cases were always like, oh, she was cheating, he was cheating, and they were also brutal behavior. And so the first, what is known now as safe house, came in the late 80s, so 89. So also social workers told me we have nowhere to place women. We can also ask ourselves if this is the right decision, that we take women out of the household and men stays in the household. But they said we didn't have apartments for women and children to move them to. So no, it's in this sense that the legislation would be very lenient to solve domestic violence. No, it wasn't. But rape, yes, rape was a different kind of problem. Marital rape was also, but there was, I didn't find any case of marital rape in the archives.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you. Also for Tanja, about portrait design, I'm just thinking it in the broader context. You were talking about responsibility and responsibility for the family and how men were allowed out of it, but also the perpetrators raising it. And I was also just wondering, about the broader political responsibility for perpetrators in the society, and how does that, is that the same story as with families, and how do they interact, I think?
Yeah, that's very interesting because, well, Tito said that the life of communists, it's not a private one, so we need to know everything. And he was saying that a communist, so if you are a member of Communist Party, you are not allowed to have a private life or to be too. So he was very, yeah, so within the Communist Party that was not, it didn't encourage any kind of domestic violence. But the problem that because I also looked at the public discourse, is that it was kind of a missing, the whole domestic violence was missing from the public discourse. But it was very present was alcoholism, because they put every emphasis on alcoholism. Men beat because they drink, and so this was kind of they shift the narrative. And within the alcoholism, there was a lot of talk about men being violent, the children didn't have the right environment to grow up. So yeah, alcoholism was kind of umbrella for this the really brutal cases of domestic violence and incest and so on. But the cases of incest were never mentioned in public ever. There was a huge stigma.
Just very quick, yes. But did you find in this case where the institutional framework is totally omissive, do the women take matters into their own hands, and do you have any record of them doing something about it?
Yeah, so I cannot confirm that, but it's in a few cases that men just died. I don't know what, like they didn't say what happened to them, but they kind of died. And I mean, they were drinking a lot of alcohol. They were kind of sick, so I don't know what happened. But in some cases they died. Women were doing better if they had social network, meaning neighbors. Neighbors were a huge part of family protection and extended family. So if the mother could go to her mother, I have one case was terrible where actually the father raped the daughter. So when she was a wife, so she married, and she had nowhere to go, and this father kept coming to that family. Now, I never learned what really went on, but we can imagine that it was still, having relationships. And then they had four children, and all four of them were taken to the foster care. So a lot of stories ended up children in a foster care or some kind of institution because they were not able to be home. Because there was just too much violence.
Any other comments, questions?
I think that we are not allowed.
Yeah. If not, thank you all three, and
The chef was not.
the lunch is so far.